It's the 18th of November. It's 8:43 in Beijing and 8:43 in the evening on the 10th.
7:43 in the
Sorry, 7:43
of the United States.
Daylight savings, right? Daylight savings. Sorry.
Yeah.
And the East Coast there of the US. This week we've got all the news. It's the biggest week of news ever. I think we've got such big stories to cover. A lot of stories to cover.
Might not add so far, because the world is
so
on
far.
a downward spiral.
Well, right. With things going on right now, maybe next week will be even more dramatic.
Yeah.
It's a big act to follow, though. Big act to follow. Mm-hmm. So obviously we're going to cover the same format that we usually do. We're going to talk about CPs and communist parties and what they're saying, as well as the main headlines of the last week. Mm-hmm. So first thing we should mention, of course, is that it's the end of the world. We have a plague, as we all know. The COVID pandemic is on. And at the same time, we've had extreme weather events, snow and flooding and whatnot. And as we're striking the climate deal, obviously God has spoken and God has sent a message to all of us in the form of scorpions. It was raining scorpions and snakes in Egypt. Yes, sudden flood. So there was, this was a few days ago. This was on the 15th of November. There were sudden floods. Then 4-inch scorpions called death stalkers came up from the ground and also came from the sky and were flooded a town. This was in Egypt. Yeah. So thoughts on that, Jen? Is it the end? Should we all start building a wooden boat?
Oh my God. No. Not even close. No? Yeah.
Well, as Marxist-Leninists, we know that this is obviously a very scientific measure. If we see raining scorpions,
right,
that is a
okay. Yeah, since we're going in that territory, then I will just comment that that's not the point. The point is to be and build an optimistic future for humanity and civilization, upward and onwards, instead of this kind of mentality of retreat, of mechanical idealism, which is oftentimes what leads to that kind of doomsday thinking.
Definitely. Let's not. Wait. This idea of having a rapture, where we're all going to go and either burn in hell or live in paradise. Yeah, it's a bit heavy, isn't it? A bit overbearing. Yeah, and also if that's on the back of your mind, I don't know. Yeah, it's quite difficult to be optimistic sometimes. Maybe.
Well, I think if you truly work for the betterment of all people of the earth, then under most commonsensical rules of most commonsensical religion, you are not going to go to hell.
Yeah.
So that's if that gives a peace of mind, then I think that's where it should be at.
Sure. I mean, we are joking about the fact that it was raining scorpions and whatnot, but this was still a flood. So actually, in real sense, it's pretty dramatic. Actually, pretty terrible for these people in Egypt having a flood and scorpions and also snakes coming down. But yeah, you're right. We should be optimistic and shouldn't have this worldview, I think. But the reason we're obviously talking about this is more broadly coming back to the topic that's been on everyone's minds for the last few weeks, obviously climate change, which is extremely important. And this obviously brings us into a discussion about China in general. Obviously, COP has wrapped up. The summit has wrapped up. Different people are saying different things. You have a lot of people saying it was just a talking shop, a jamboree. Not much substance came out of it. But as we mentioned last week, there were some tentative sort of beginnings of agreements between China and the US, which is very important. They're the biggest economies in the world. And obviously that first breakthrough on methane, that China agreeing to cut methane. But obviously we have to talk a bit about, obviously economy and climate is linked intrinsically. And the next big piece of news, huge piece of news, as of suppose it was just over yesterday. When was it? Yeah, yesterday. This is from Business Insider. According to them, and they're obviously reporting from McKinsey, McKinsey & Co., the massive consultancy, China has overtaken the US as the richest country in the world, according to them, as of yesterday.
So it really is the end of the world.
It is the end of the world, exactly. The US is number 2 now. So the US is number 2, and it started raining scorpions. So right. No, but I mean, to be honest, this is a bit silly, this kind of measuring of economies like this. Because PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their report, when their reports, they already list, China as having the largest economy, and they've been doing it since 2016 or 2017. They do it by PPP, purchasing power parity. By that measure, China has had a big economy, or has a big economy, for 5 years, more than 5 years. But yeah, this is according to McKinsey & Co. They obviously make an assessment of property values, and I think by their thing they say that more than 60% of the world's income. Sorry, 1 second. Yes, basically Chinese growth is accounted for most of the economic growth in the last 30 years. But these guys also count property and infrastructure in their measurement of an economy. So rather than just exchanges, they also look at real estate. Yeah, and to be honest, they also say that 68% of global net worth is stored in real estate. So if you think about how much, and that's including infrastructure. So if you think about Chinese infrastructure, it makes sense that they've been given this title.
Of course,
by PwC, by McKinsey.
Yeah. There are a few things to comment on this. One is obviously, like you said, a measurement alone of who is number one is more psychological and just for show than it is for reality. Why China and US is in conflict because of a conflict of philosophy, ideas, and economy. Not because of a purely egotistical contest of who is number one. That is what the shallow, vulgar nationalists of the world think. But that is not how reality actually works. Just because the status of who is technically number one has changed doesn't mean that the conflict is going to end, doesn't mean that the form of the conflict is going to end, unless you pull an Apollo moon landing, which is, even though you have not had total advantage in the space industry, you start saying, hey, look at this, we have proved the superiority of our society. Unless you overblow it for that kind of really cheap and unsocialistic, unscientific propaganda victory, then it doesn't mean that much. That's the first thing I want to say, and I would expect that it won't be celebrated in China as some sort of significant victory. Because we're all very practically minded people, right?
Yeah.
Now, secondly, the measurement is interesting. There's been some ideas thrown around in China about the socialist theory on economics, and specifically what is currency, what is the value of currency, how should currency be valued. Clearly, this is largely thanks to Professor He Zuoxiu, which is a senior scientist at the Chinese Academy of Science, has background in nuclear physics, one of the founding fathers of the Chinese nuclear weapon program, and a Marxist-Leninist political economist. So in one of his interviews, he talks about clearly, currency as it is in the Western Keynesian economies are nonsense. Why? It's literally a commodity that can be traded. So how come that the measurement of value is also a commodity? The measurements of all commodities is also a commodity itself, in which it can rise and fall in value. So then what does that mean for the value of every other commodity? Right, and what is this all based on? It's all based on estimations. There is in economy, let's not go into what's called cardinal theory and ordinal theory. Which basically, like, these two, don't worry about it. It's all just like estimates of like roughly how expensive, how pricey something is. Estimates of value, but that's scientifically and mathematically impossible. If you were to use that kind of thinking in science and math, that would spell disasters. Nothing would ever get done. What is a centimeter? What is a liter of water? So then what?
Between 8 and 12, or something like that.
Exactly. And then what is 8? What is 12? What is numbers?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, 8 is somewhere between 6 and 7. You know.
Right. So then, how should we measure it? Well, the idea thrown around by Professor He is essentially you should measure it by infrastructure. Why? Because infrastructure, both information infrastructure, so like internet, 4G, 5G, and physical infrastructure for passengers and cargo, and also social infrastructure, as in like the stability of your society, how safe is your environment, and how well are your people taken care of? Do people have healthcare? Are all contributes to how conducive is this environment for economic growth and innovation and productivity? Because if those things are not secure, if you are, say, a foreign company, you invest in that environment, you will not be getting nearly as much as you would have hoped for if you were to, say, invest in another environment where every single one of those things are top notch, right? Because it's a multiplicative quality. Essentially, if you and I were trading, and we had the same kind of setup in scenario A and scenario B. Scenario A, the train takes 1 hour for me to ship my goods to you, and it takes me 5 minutes to receive my payment. And scenario 2, my goods takes 30 minutes to get to you, and it only takes 2.5 minutes for me to receive my payment. That means that even though we all had the same initial setup, both of us can trade at way faster speeds, and therefore both of us can benefit and grow at in this simple example, twice as fast. So you, as a financial entity, investing in a entity number 2, scenario number 2, would be way more profitable and efficient than it is a scenario 1. Therefore, the currency of scenario 2, country 2, should be more valuable than scenario 1. Therefore, whichever country has region has more, whichever currency in the zone that is backing it has more efficiency, is more conducive for productivity, should be valued more highly. Hence, the currency should be valued higher. Hence, the overall economy should be valued higher, because it is a fundamentally more productive place that is easier to just simply get things done, because getting things done is economic activity.
That makes sense.
So, in this perspective, I would like to say that this is this coverage and this report is quite interesting.
It is. I think the important thing, as you say there, about the actual sort of quantification of value. You're talking about the value or the importance of efficiency and speed and transactional exchange speeds and whatnot. And that's something built upon by having infrastructure, so electricity, fast internet, high-speed rail, road networks, air networks, and just communication infrastructure too. And within China, those things have all been invested in heavily. Just so we can get the number on it. Sorry, just because we didn't put the numbers down here. Just looking at China itself, not looking at the US side. So this is from McKinsey. In 2000, their valuation for China was $7 trillion US dollars, and now it's 120 trillion US dollars. So that infrastructure investment, as well as investments in everything else and all the other parts of the economy that have been quantified, that is a massive jump in 21 years to go from 7 trillion to 120 trillion. That's massive. But before we we are going to be talking about China for a bit. So let's plow through here. We already mentioned the climate deal a bit last week, so let's focus more on the sort of the underlying politics of the climate deal anyway, because it's still, even though it shouldn't be, it is kind of secondary to the geopolitics of the situation, which is obviously Biden. I'm tempted to call him Beta Biden because now he's got the second largest economy, but no.
Well, yeah,
let's call him Biden. Climate deal, and then Biden chat. So the Biden chat. So obviously Xi and Biden had a virtual summit, which means they had a Zoom chat. Virtual summit. Right? They met on the internet.
Yes.
Just like this, nothing more
exactly
than what we're doing right now. But yes, Tuesday morning, both sides seem relatively positive. Obviously, I read the New York Times take on this, and I've read the Global Times take on this, and very big difference, very contrasting difference between the two. But yeah, I think to say that it was relatively positive is good. We have to remember that we are, obviously we're 1 year into Biden's administration, but we did have 4 years of Trump. And, those are very fraught, the trade war and lots of spats and lots of, tit for tat kind of stuff. So this is perhaps a nicer, maybe a link, the return to something a bit more or less, less friction. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this meeting then, General?
Starting off of that, of course, Chairman Mao said, I'm paraphrasing and translating here, but something along the lines of, the Americans are very arrogant, the American imperialists. Whatever they can get away with not being reasonable, they will not be reasonable. If any time they act out to be reasonable, it is because they have been forced essentially to sit down at the negotiation table. Well, this is exactly that, isn't it? So for a little bit of background, during Trump's administration, their advisor on the issue of China is this man named Yu Maochun. Yu Maochun, without going into too deeply, is one of those, essentially during the market reforms, privatization period in China, after reform and opening up, decided to flee to the West because of wealth, and he is one of those kind of waves of higher-ranking mid to high-tier Chinese social elites that decided that all the knowledge that they've learned, all the benefits they've received from the socialist system is only going. They're not going to be grateful for it, but instead they're going to flee to the United States and use all that as a way to generate wealth and enjoy personal luxury. Yeah, at the expense of everyone else. So what did he do? Well, he became political advisor, think tanker for analyst for the United States. What is this? What are their thing? The thing is essentially underestimating China, saying China is going to collapse, saying that a dictatorial Oriental authoritarian system couldn't possibly amount to anything, so on and so forth. What did that lead to? That led to severe strategic failures, decision-making failures of the American administration. Essentially, that was what led to Trump having the belief that he can win the trade war against China. How? By I forgot the exact numbers because it has been a while, but essentially the number, the GDP of China and US is quite close in terms of production. But then what do you do to convince yourself that you can win? You raise up the number of the American number because you are a democracy and therefore organizational superiority. And then you cut down the Chinese number by a bit because the Chinese number, surely because they are a bunch of sneaky lying Asians, must be boasting, right? And then if the disparity between China and US really is that much, then you just simply do a race to the bottom You say, let's see who cannot withstand the fallout of this trade war first. It turns out it was the U.S. that couldn't handle it first. And so this is, along with a lot of military development, where the Chinese military had to demonstrate to the U.S. that China has the ability to absolutely lock down and fortify the Western Pacific through various means. We can get into that later.
You mean the Indo-Pacific?
Yes. It forced the Americans onto the negotiation table. Now they are willing to use reason. And that is honestly just a safer environment for the whole world. Because possibly when nuclear powers go to war, it tends to go nuclear, and it's good for no one.
Sure. I mean, from the Global Times here, that they're saying that it's a watershed moment to try and normalize things. This idea of great power confrontation or Cold War, confrontation, Cold War relations. At least from the Chinese side, they do not want this. They do not want this to happen. They don't like that kind of thing. Globalized trade and production, as we've had for a long time. We've had lots of growth, and global growth for people.
I just want to say this. Essentially, another reason for that is because the United States and the U.S. dollar currency economically, but also like as in our last episode, we talked about the United States 800 plus biological experimentation labs around the world, right? All of it makes if the United States is on the decline, which I think everybody can agree on that one. There is a real risk of all these things are not managed properly, then the United States empire, the American empire, is a net negative ticking time bomb for all of humanity. Imagine, so we saw during the fall of the Soviet Union, for example, that lots of weapons, tanks specific, and aircrafts were left out in the field. Nobody wanted to manage them. It's not my job. I'm not getting paid to deal with this. That kind of thinking. Imagine if the United States went through that.
Oh yeah, you'd have
all its God knows however many hundreds of if not thousands brand of biological weapons would be leaked all across the world. The U.S. dollar and its collapse will lead to immediate just the international trade commerce would just immediately annihilated.
Absolutely catastrophic. Yeah. No, sure. Yeah. I mean, we can only hope that the U.S. doesn't collapse in a terribly dramatic way like that.
So I think it's the job of China and the international community to manage this crashing aircraft to where it's a soft landing, not just a giant fireball that's going to create a massive crater. It is our planet.
It is a very so as we mentioned, end of the world, right? With scorpions flying down the sky. The Chinese economy has overtaken, and we are at this moment. I mean, we've in this article they do say that in the meeting Biden did still stress the one China policy, so they're not pushing Taiwanese independence. But it is a watershed moment, like you said. We don't. The U.S. is declining. And it wouldn't be good for a massive confrontation or a massive collapse or nuclear war. But bear in mind that that's still not, they might talk about not wanting to return to Cold War policies. But as we've mentioned in 2 episodes now, this Indo-Pacific alliance, the Quad or UK, Australia, and the US, the pieces for returning to stable, multilateral, globalized exchange and progress and perhaps some sort of future, and the potential for confrontation, both of them still
exist. That's correct.
That brings us to the sort of minor story we have here. But so this was released by the BBC. The mock-up warships pictured in the China desert. So these were, pretty big. I don't know what they're made out of. Maybe wood, maybe metal. Who knows? Big mock-up fake ships in the desert in Xinjiang on rails, so they would move. Obviously. This is for target practice, right? So they have, China develops anti-ship missiles, as does everyone else. and you need to practice.
Specifically, this target has to be for anti-ship ballistic missiles.
Okay. Right.
The kind that can fire across if fired from the east coast of China westwards to Xinjiang, it needs to travel across the entire length of China.
Okay.
If
that's what happened here. Is that is that the route that was taken? So they fired these missiles from that distance, or using that distance.
We don't know that yet.
Okay, I was going to say I didn't find that myself.
Or that's how it's supposed to be done, because anti-ship missiles these days, in order to avoid radar detection, flies very low. Imagine what happens when your anti-ship missiles are flying very low across the whole country, or across a large stretch of land that might have inhabitants, travelers, cities in them. That's not a safe way to experiment. So it has to be over a high arc, high enough to surpass all air traffic.
Yeah,
which is what leads me to conclude to that.
Yeah, no, it would make sense that I mean, I suppose they could use any range, really. Could fire from short distance or whatnot. But I mean, just to caveat all of this, it's everyone does target practice, and the idea that they've created a mock-up of an aircraft carrier. This shows that they are imminently going to attack U.S. warships. Is not true.
Well,
I mean, every military in the world will practice with their hypothetical enemy.
Yeah.
And in this case, yes, I mean, China isn't practicing.
To quote,
They don't practice shooting anything else apart from U.S. aircraft carriers.
To quote a movie, I forgot what the movie was called. Maybe you can remind. Doctor Strangelove, I believe. It was.
Yeah.
It was about an early Cold War movie about the ridiculousness of a nuclear war. The scientist who is supposed to be the embodiment of the Operation Paperclip, the U.S. imported Nazi German scientists, saying the whole point of a strategic weapon, if not known, is lost. The whole point of having a weapon is to defend yourself. But then how do you do that? You make sure the enemy know that the strategic weapon exists. And if they try anything, they will be destroyed. And therefore, they won't try anything. And therefore, the peace will be maintained because no one will try anything. And that is what we call deterrence.
Yes.
Right? That's the whole point of having a weapon for the purpose of peace. If you, say, had a massive secret weapon hidden away in some sort of mountain complex and the whole world doesn't know about it, then what's the point?
Sure.
The enemy side is still going to think clearly, you have nothing, I can invade you. And then when they do, the weapon gets launched and everybody dies. Like, what is that? That's not deterrence. That's not peace. That's ambush. Right? So, the whole point is to deter the United States for the purpose of peace in the region.
Yeah. No, that is completely accurate. Yeah, I think that's true. I think we can't. I don't think there should be any criticism for doing this. I mean, it's not. It's completely understandable.
Unless you're CNN or Fox,
unless you're trying to sell news that is dramatic.
Exactly.
Right, so this is pretty normal. There's nothing intense here.
Right.
Just on the next thing, obviously, we talking about China. Another big story, obviously, this week was that she has been raised to what's called revered leader status. And again, depending on where you get your news, different people have said different things. Some people have said, this is proof of chairman for life or something like that. And all types of terrible evil communist things. But tell us about this one, Jen. What is this revered status thing? Just on one point. So revered leaders, the other two revered leaders in Chinese Communist Party would be Mao and Deng Xiaoping. But now they've obviously elevated Xi Jinping to the stage. So what does it mean to be a revered leader?
It just means it's very closely tied to socialist theory. It essentially means this leader has done something extraordinary in direction change of sorts in both practicality and theory, breakthroughs in theoretical development. And obviously needs to be done in the interest of the preservation of the socialist motherland.
Okay.
That's pretty much it.
Okay. I mean, also, doesn't it, I mean, in terms of Xi Jinping thought, does this solidify his ideology or his, not necessarily ideology?
It's more
things.
It's more complex than that.
Okay.
By a long shot.
Sure.
It has to do with the actual serious understanding and of what actually is socialism, and then the debate of how to achieve socialism and how to achieve communism. Not just the kind of aesthetic-based nonsensical aesthetic-based understanding of what socialism is. So I will try to get through this very quickly. Essentially, if we look at early writings, this, by the way, before we go into it, is closely tied to the whole statement, and this was taken out of context, obviously. But the whole statement was what's called the historical resolution and this is decision of the Communist Party of China. That's roughly poorly translated. My apologies, because it just came out yesterday. It came out within 12 hours after the Biden summit. The Xi Jinping Biden Joe Biden Zoom meeting.
Yep.
Though it probably wasn't Zoom. Okay, getting back on track. So there's already a strategic implication on that. I'll get to that in a minute. Essentially, the building of socialism is the manifestation of the class will of the proletariat. What is the proletariat? Well, the proletariat is according to Marx, class that is whose survival depends not on exploitation but on the concentration of production, i.e., industry. So the class survives not by exploiting others, not by making any kind of scammy little deals, but production, concentrated, organized production. That's the lifeblood of the proletariat. If you don't survive by that means, then it's there is you start to deviate away from what it means to be a proletariat. So then if we were to look at the definition of what is a peasant, the peasant, see, class is dependent on your relation to production, not how much money you have. Peasants, despite being extremely exploited and oppressed, and having barely to near zero money, their class nature is in fact petty bourgeois. It's the same as like your small artisan, small business owner. Very similar kind of mentality. Why you have a small piece of land, work, make profit.
Yeah,
by selling
commodities. Right.
So then, if we notice, if we go by this conception, we very quickly start to realize that Mao Zedong and the early post 1935 CPC up until the before 1950 is in fact a party that fights for the interest of the Chinese peasantry primarily, which means it's actually in fact fighting for something closer to a petty bourgeois interest. I know it sounds bad, but the context is very different. So it was still the people's liberation, but it's just that China didn't have much of a proletariat. So in order to realistically accomplish this people's liberation, national liberation, you needed to do the primary body, which is the peasants. Now, what happened? Well, the Korean War happened. China needed heavy weapons. Artilleries, planes, guns, big cannons, trucks, so on and so forth. What are all those things? Those are heavy industry. Who produces heavy industry?
The proletariat.
Industrial proletariat does.
Yeah.
So the USSR stepped in under Stalin to give massive aids for entire China to industrialize, and also to be able to meet the demands for weapons for the battlefield, for the front lines. What did that demand out of China? That demand out of China in 1951 to shift from a petty bourgeois peasantry focused nation to artificially trying to create industrialization through creating an industrial proletariat that literally didn't exist before then. And hence the Chinese process of industrialization started. But here's the thing. After the Sino-Soviet split, USSR, under Khrushchev's revisionism, immediately withdrew all industrial technical support on the spot. In a situation where the Chinese nation only had like a few thousand people that even knew calculus out of a population of 400 million plus. So everything halted. All of a sudden, the proletariat was unemployed that were living in these concentrated industrial cities. So they became a kind of net negative asset. They have nowhere to go. They are unemployed, but they still need to eat. They're not producing anything. So what do? You send them off to the countryside. So to where they start working in communes. But ironically, that was done in an aesthetic, so including Cultural Revolution, from the economic perspective, it was done out of an aesthetic understanding of socialism that represented what people thought socialism is, which is when you simply be nice to the peasants. That's it. Nothing else. But socialism is that and everything else.
Right.
So that kind of had a problem where because China was not able to develop industry and modernization and keep up with the world, we were essentially in a cyclical struggle of will of the proletariat in urban industry, and then when overproduction happens, but when your technology cannot be upgraded, so you run into the Malthusian problem, and then immediately switch to the will of the petty bourgeois in the countryside with subsistent agriculture. So what is Deng Xiaoping theory? Why is he the second revered leader?
Second revered leader, yeah.
He is the one to say that we can't have this anymore because it would be like a functioning person that's trying to walk, but your foot is just stomping on the same piece of ground.
Yeah.
That's not working. So what do? Well, you try to resolve that by industrialization and modernization at any cost necessary so that you can actually have an industrialization, that you can have an industrial proletariat as the majority of your country once and for all. And that you can truly build socialism. That is the part of Deng Xiaoping theory that is never talked about here in the West.
Sure.
Because one, it's kind of hard to access because language barrier. Two is because people haven't even read Marx. Are making these same aesthetic based comments. So this great historical resolution rebuking the legitimacy of the Cultural Revolution, saying that Mao made Comrade Mao made a strategic miscalculation, and the Gang of Four took that opportunity, seized that opportunity, and were just going full on conspiracy mode, trying to take over the country. Why? Well, it's because like even in that kind of aesthetic, like just be nice to the peasants kind of mode of socialism, which is a response to all the problems of the severe problems of the Chinese society at the time of remnants of feudal culture and so on and so forth, and feudal practices of corruption, bigotry, and so on and so forth, right? That kind of aesthetic-based solution still understood at least the importance of technology and advancements. Why the first Chinese satellite, the Chinese nuclear program, the first Chinese cargo ship, and also the first Chinese gyroscope that can withstand over 200 G of acceleration. That all came out of the Cultural Revolution era. So it was not like a completely technological.
No, yeah, sure. No, I think
as Westerners tend to want to propagate that.
But
it was not based out of an understanding of socialism. It has gotten to a point where the Gang of Four are essentially people who didn't even think that technological progress was possible.
Right.
So like it essentially is a optimal, suboptimal, and just the worst case scenario kind of situation.
Sure.
So this historical resolution under is essentially pointing that out, spelling that out clearly, and saying that we are now progressing towards social. And it also, the beautiful thing about the document is that it does not shy away from any of the problems ever since the reform and opening up period. In fact, only 30% of the article was about what the statement on the Mao's Cultural Revolution and the Game of War.
Yeah,
70% of the length is spent on the CPC criticizing itself, saying all the lack of devotion to the people, lack of faith in communism, lack of theoretical understanding, corruption, bribery, so on and so forth of the party.
A big part of the document. Yeah, exactly. It's not as patting on the back.
Right. It's quite the opposite.
Revered Leader. It's a deep.
Right. It's quite the opposite of
highly reflective document. I mean,
highly self-critical.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think this is something that we often don't get to talk about or listen to in Western media is the internal politics of the CPC. So you do have different schools of thought and different outlooks. I mean, you have sort of the Chongqing school and the Shanghai group, or whatever you want to call it. And particularly this document, they talked about, the document did have to sort of try and balance and appease to both sides, all different, more than one side, or more than two sides. But I think about the corruption. Yeah, so obviously the Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin era, obviously still having lots of development and economic expansion and technological advancement, like you say. But there were problems too. This direction came with many problems: corruption, internal sort of nepotism. And all kinds of stuff. So, this is why I think the Xi is given more of a revered status than perhaps Jiang.
Because that trend of downward spiral was able to be truly halted through him and his actions of what is it? Well, anti-corruption and internal investigation of long-term party history. So it's not just like what you've done in like the past 4 or 5 years. No. The past 20 years, starting his presidency, and also poverty alleviation campaign. What is that? That is a kind of internal cleansing of the Chinese system, political system. By basically sending a bunch of all your new generation of uncorrupted, somewhat idealistic followers of Mao and the communist cause, to send them to every corner of the country at the most underdeveloped regions to develop communism there. And that was able to. And then that kind of bottom-up approach combined with the top-down Ministry of Internal Disciplines, right? As I think is internal disciplinary actions where they investigate, say, your financial history, how many houses and mega mansions have you bought? Where did that come from?
So what's interesting is that this has been raised as a criticism, sort of. They make it seem draconian. They go, they're asking all these questions, about how many cars you have and questions about your practices, and it's almost been portrayed as a negative thing. It's like, well, I mean, I wish we could have this kind of inquiry into.
What's this legal? It's just called lobbying. It's not corruption. We make it legal.
No, sure. Imagine if you're government. Imagine if you're government in South Africa or the UK, where they went. So, how much money have you been given by X corporation? I don't want to talk about that. And how much money is the NRA given you? So, if you had this inquiry in the
how US, much is tobacco giving you?
Right, exactly.
Which led to how many people's death?
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Which exactly? Who is paid for you? That's basically what that asks, and that's completely right. Like, I think all politicians should have that kind of inquiry.
I do want to knock one more point out of the way before we move on, which is from the perspective of a bureaucracy, an administration, an institution. Institutional, what Mao called political organization power, i.e., like how efficient is your institution, how easily are you able to get things done across departments and across layers, so horizontally and vertically, is the same whether it is against internal problems or external problems. So the same chokeholds of the corrupt officials and the unprincipled communists, so on and so forth, within the party is the same kind of chokeholds that will lead to China's inability to, say, militarily defend itself from foreign aggression.
Mm-hmm.
So why? Because interdepartmental conflict of interest. If your interest is based in scam money, then I am not doing work if you don't give me pocket cash, essentially, right? So this kind of internal adjustment, calibration, and cleansing is 100% needed for China to remain competent in the face of the United States, which is, I would say, one of the reasons why the statement immediately came out after within 12 hours of the end of the Biden Zoom call.
Sure.
Which is essentially also a display that essentially think like an athlete or a combat sport athlete doing warm-ups and stretches and popping their joints before ready to get into a fight. Institutionally speaking, that would be the same thing.
Right. Okay.
Sorting out your internal deficiencies before you go in.
Exactly. Yes. Don't have any weaknesses. Yeah. Don't have
exactly.
any. Sort your house out. But yeah, I think we've we've discussed China quite a lot, and I think we've covered that, so we can move our focus. So yeah, we still have quite a lot of stories to cover for this week. So let's go on to well, actually, let's just mention this one in passing, because obviously last week also de Klerk, the last apartheid leader of South Africa, died, passed away in his mid-85. He was struggling with cancer, I believe, lung cancer. I think it's been quite interesting because we had different people in South Africa mentioning this. Obviously, you mentioned it, of course, being the last apartheid leader. I don't think we need to talk about it too much. He did get given a Nobel Peace Prize, so I feel like he got given enough of a reward for the role that he did play. I don't really want to necessarily honor him too much, though.
Yeah.
A few years ago, he got into controversy. I think it was actually 2 years ago, where he was interviewed and asked, was apartheid a crime against humanity? And he sort of said no. He had to backpedal that.
Typical.
His family did release his foundation, I should say, did release a final message, and he did apologize for all of the stuff that he had, what his leadership and what his party and party or separate development, as they sort of later started calling it, what that had wrought for all of the people of South Africa, but particularly Black people and colored people and brown people. I suppose he did win a Nobel Peace Prize. He did play some role, but at the same time, I don't want to honor him too much. In the early 90s, as Mandela had said, he did play a role in the third force and trying to push politics in a direction that we would have preferred. Let's not kid ourselves. This guy was not the most revolutionary of leaders. This guy was still a National Party leader. I mean, yes, he avoided civil war and did just begin the process of dismantling apartheid from inside the National Party, but at the same time was still a member of the National Party. So let's leave it at that.
And a short comment that arguably led to South Africa's inability to develop itself into a modern powerhouse, as we would hoped to have seen post-apartheid. And it's because of that, but we won't go into it too deeply.
Sure. I mean, to be fair, I think the collapse of the Soviet Union might be a better reason as to why we didn't have the progress in South Africa that could have happened. But yeah, we can discuss that a bit further another time. Well, although that does lead us quite nicely into our next segment, which will firstly start by discussing the CPs, different CPs around the world, and what's happened and what they've been up to. So communist parties around the world, what have they been doing? Workers' parties as well. So this week, actually, a lot of CPs, a lot of communist parties releasing statements about Cuba, which we'll discuss in a moment. But other things that happened, we had the Kurdistan, the CP of Kurdistan had their Congress. Other parties, so still talking about COP. So the CP of Ireland released a message about COP, the climate summit. But to be honest, most of the messages are about Cuba. So messages of solidarity, messages or descriptions of the blockades and whatnot. Yeah. So what we'll do now is we will talk about the blockade. So the CP of, well, the Cuban Communist Party itself, talking about the blockade. So with Trump, we had new sanctions come in. You know, the blockade against Cuba was heightened, was made more intense. There were more things applied. And Biden did talk about, this is according to the Cubans, he said that he was going to walk those back. He was going to repeal them. He has said in some speeches at some point, but that hasn't happened. And actually, you know, this these efforts, this imperialist aggression against Cuba has actually only heightened, hadn't become stronger with Biden. So Trump applying new measures, repealing what Obama had done, increasing the grip, making things harder for Cuban people. Biden hasn't walked any of that back. Those are just empty words. And of course, there was this this planned protest, this sort of attempt at a color revolution. I don't know what you want to call it, but this group of people that tried to, you know, try to overthrow, undermine the Cuban revolution and the Cuban government. There was some stuff on Granma, the Cuban Party's paper, the national paper. And there's a group called the Red Bandannas who actually have emerged to counter this these mobilizations.
Oh, that's a interesting. So, for reference, for those who didn't grow up in communist countries, a red bandana is would be close to what like the Communist Youth League would wear, like that scarf.
Oh, the youth scarf, right?
Yeah. So they call. That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear that they would call themselves that.
So they been holding counter protests and have been, you know, and this Red Bandana movement is it consists of people that are part of collectives or cooperatives, youth organizations, and all sorts of grassroots organizations that have come up and countered this attempt.
That's really wonderful news. Essentially, like. When a communist organization one knows what they're doing, and the two parts of knowing what they're doing is the theoretical front and the kind of emotional front of people's emotional lives, are truly understanding of what your communist cause is, and if your communist cause is legitimate and valid, then the masses of people will come out and support you, and struggle and attempts of propaganda and deceit by the enemy will in fact only serve to strengthen the understanding of communism in your whatever your setting is. Because the people may only hear about socialism. It's this thing that it's just a thing I've heard of. It doesn't matter. It doesn't relate to me. That would be the kind of mindset that people would have. But then, okay, I should clarify. This is the kind of context in a country where the socialism is the norm, not like in Western countries, say, where you're struggling for socialism. But the idea is basically, socialism, cool. This is just a thing that the teachers and my parents talk about, and they talk about on the announcements. Big deal. Why is that? What does that have to do with me? Until you see the consequences of what enemy imperialist aggression actually looks like in your own life. And then each and every communist will make a very clear and dedicated choice to say, no more of that. We know why all these socialist things are talked about now. Everything clicks together, and that forms Again, that can only happen if your teaching of socialism is alive and a part of social consciousness, and not just a dead thing, not just a dead kind of distant idol, but a part of people's lives. And second, if it actually makes any sense to the people, and then you would see this kind of reaction where people would take up arms to say, "This is my socialist motherland." And it is up to the duty of every citizen to defend it. That's the kind of attitudes that we're seeing with all the communist regions of the world, and for sure, even in like some former Soviet regions, we're seeing a resurgence of this kind of sentiment, because we've truly been exposed to the naked truth of what imperialism actually is, instead of what it advertises itself to be. And this is the reason that we're seeing this kind of stuff.
There's an important thing to mention on this one, is that even globally, I mean, amongst countries that aren't even socialist, these blockades and this aggression, basically, the UN has voted multiple times on the status of these sanctions and this blockade and the legitimacy of the blockade. And the vote, I mean, every time has been almost, I think, the only countries that have voted against voted for the blockade effectively, the US and Israel, and perhaps sometimes you get some outliers, but
sometimes Ukraine, I guess.
Sure. I mean, obviously it changes here and there, but so this is not just a question of whether, you know, socialists or communists are in favor of ending the blockade. The entire world agrees that this is a heinous, like, horrible crime and unnecessary. I mean, and also let's also accept, like, you know, if you have a blockade for more than 50 years, has it really worked? I mean, what have you achieved? And I'd like to actually caveat that with, despite having a 50-year plus blockade and all of these attempts, assassination attempts, and these color revolution protests and all sorts of attacks, probably stuff that we won't even know about, you know, attempts by the CIA and projects paid for by the new NED. But let's just look at something specific here in terms of the kind of things that Cuba achieves. I'd like to also mention that the South African story, coming back to de Klerk, that yes, de Klerk was given a Nobel Peace Prize, but the end of apartheid was not because of him. The end of apartheid was because of years of struggle by organizations such as the ANC and the SACP, but particularly also the Cubans and the Soviet Union. The safe haven of Angola and the war in Angola and the Battle of Quito Carnival, that was fundamentally important to overthrowing apartheid. So we should really be celebrating and fighting and helping the Cubans, and not talking about de Klerk's very minor role in comparison.
Because going by that logic, nuclear weapons should receive the Nobel Peace Prize every single year.
Yes, they should. Yes. Well, Barack Obama, of course, received the Nobel Peace Prize. So we know that Nobel Peace Prizes are, you know, a quantitatively balanced thing. No, just to show you of the stuff that they do achieve internally while being under blockade. So this week, the Cuban biotechnology, they opened, the CIGB, Mariel Biotechnology Facility was open. So this is in the Mariel Special Development Zone. Basically a giant facility was opened, and this will be producing vaccines and innovative drugs to treat diseases that affect the Cuban population. But we must remember that this country, under blockade, has produced its own vaccines, and I think more than one vaccine for COVID. And I think the only country that might have produced a vaccine in Latin America, along with Cuba, is perhaps Brazil. And now, if you compare the sizes of these countries, the economy,
for a country, for a country's size of Florida, to be able to accomplish all of that
under blockade, has achieved its own vaccine. So, really amazing. The potential that you can have when you have socialist production and organized production for the needs of the people, amazing. But yes, so that's Cuba. I think what we need to cover now, we haven't got much time. We are running out of time, actually. Is we want to just cover the Eastern European situation. So there's three things. I mean, it's quite a mess right now. There's a lot of news coming out of there. You obviously have the Belarus border situation, Poland-Belarus border with the migrants happening there. But at the same time, also the Nord Stream pipeline, so the gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, coming across the Baltic Sea, so Russian gas coming across the Baltic Sea into Germany. Germany has halted
cut it off, and gas prices soared.
Right, gas prices soared. The reason they said that they wanted it to be registered under a German company, under German law. But this, under stressing the importance, the economic relationship between Russian gas and European. But yeah,
of course, the rapidly increasing military tension and arguably active battles that's happening right now. So essentially, last time we covered the Union State, and as soon as the Union State Declaration went through, we already saw during our last coverage that the military tension has already risen in the forms of the Ukrainian ground forces and the American Air Force. And now it has gotten to the point where on the front, two major kinds of things are happening. One is the migrant crisis, where the migrants are essentially stuck. The refugees really stuck between Belarus and Poland. But the reason that Belarus and Poland, aside from political reasons and beliefs, is not going to be able to handle the situation is because of the military situation. Anytime anything happens on that border, in that region, the old Cold War, especially now the Union states, the Slavic Union Slavic states versus NATO, like that show is back on again. So what are we seeing? All the Baltic nations mobilizing and relocating their military to push further closer to Belarus and Russia. Poland driving all their Leopard 2, I forgot exactly which type, but their advanced tanks up to the border.
Numeric alpha code, sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's either 2A4 or A6, I forgot which one. And we're seeing a Ukrainian army just going back into the Donbas region where the pro-Russian people are residing. And Ukrainian special forces trained by NATO and equipped with night missions. There are reported videos of this. They are like literally attacking and just assassinating East Ukrainian militias and a whole list of other military support from the United States. And in return, Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has requested for the deployment of Russian ballistic missiles to help with this situation. So we really see like just how incredibly tense the situation has become. And so like essentially this is really sinister. NATO nations is letting its Baltic and Eastern European smaller nations and more underdeveloped nations to do the fighting for them, and then potentially suffer any consequences if the Union state were to retaliate and making any kind of a counterattack. And then what is the Western nations doing? The U.S. is only flying some planes. Germany is only doing some economic shenanigans and sabotage. And Britain and France is doing absolutely nothing. A big fat zero.
Right.
So that's that whole situation. At least all the news that we are able to see and gather.
Yeah. I think we're not going to see. I mean, this is nothing has particularly changed. I mean, I know we've got a ratcheting up. He's talking about bringing missiles in, and there's more sanctions, and now there's more troops. Polish deployed more troops, and people are talking about hardware coming in, and it's nothing has changed in terms of that. Things have just gotten more tense.
Right, exactly.
A breakthrough. So it's interesting what we're going to see, because this will come to some sort of agreement or head in the next week.
I would argue, keep this in mind contextually. Biden's virtual visit to China is related to this. During the Vietnam War era, Kissinger secretly basically smuggled himself into the Chinese border. And then, of course, the official Nixon visit was a kind of visit to say that, like, okay, the United States is during decline, relatively. it needs to re-entrench itself. The fall of Saigon and the reunification of Vietnam, for example. That's the perfect example. And so essentially asking for a statement, for a promise from China that it will not be in hot pursuit of all the collapsing American forces, infrastructure, and territory, so that America can relocate and deal with the Soviet Union in the European front. And that recuperation saved a lot of money, and then the United States was able to develop stronger through even more exploitation under Reagan internally, and all those billions and trillions of dollars went to fighting the USSR. So, but that was from the Russian perspective, you can say that it's a betrayal of communist China, but understand that happened long after Khrushchev's betrayal of socialism in general. So the Sino-Soviet split, where every single communist leader across the world was not fond of Khrushchev, and essentially, and later on, Soviets' plan to militarily threaten China and so on and so forth led to that. But now the situation is different. See, the Americans have this real nasty tendency of seeing politics and international strategy as a ritual. They did this set of rituals and worked last time. Therefore, if I cast this spell and carry out this sacrifice again, sometimes human sacrifice, it will work again this time. So I'm pretty certain that this is what's going on in the Biden administration's mind when they are calling China and calling for peace. It's not well-intentioned. It's still wanting the destruction of communism across the board. It's just, hey, let us recuperate kind of deal. But this time it should be a lot different. Why? Because there is no conflict of interest between China and Russia and the future Union State. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The eventual goal of the Union State is highly in unison with China's goal of One Belt, One Road. So the two sides are as tight, working as tightly as they ever could, ever since the Stalin's era. So we are going to, like, this is essentially what I'm saying is that this is not over. Next week when we cover this, we're going to see some major reaction by all participating sides.
Right. I think, going on your point there about contradiction between the Union State or Russia or the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States. Yeah, those guys with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they're all in line, I think, generally speaking. There's mutual interest there. There's a giant trade network, lots of exchange, lots of trade going on, lots of infrastructure and projects together. There's no major contradiction there. I think they have
absolutely not. The Chinese and the Russian military, in fact, has been training together to be integrated into one command.
Sure. No.
So you don't do that when you're not tight together.
But next week,
essentially, the anti-imperialist nations of the world, China, Russia, Belarus, Iran, so on and so forth, we will see some kind of major pushback very quickly. And hopefully we can manage this to where, again, we don't see the end of the world as we talked about at the beginning of the show.
Yes, hopefully we don't have the end of the world. Right. So we don't know where this story is going to go with this particular exchange. We don't know where these migrants will end up. Maybe there'll be an airlift. Maybe there'll be a deal. Maybe they'll make a zone. Who knows? We'll see. We'll have to cover that next week or maybe the week after. I don't think it's going to come to a head today.
No, or a week.
Our final story, we're going to end on something a bit lighter, something entertaining. In India, in Kerala state, if you're not aware, Kerala state is, I think, at least a provincial level, run by a communist party. And obviously they have some great rallies there and they do some great work. I know that Kerala has some great social programs thanks to the Communist Party that is governing there. And as you can guess, ideology, the Marxist ideology has, or the communist ideologies has set in this area. So there was a wedding in Kerala, and in this particular wedding, we have the groom. The groom was called Frederick Engels, very nice. The bride is called Bismitha, lovely name too. And along with the groom and the bride, we had other Communist Party members. One of them is called Marx, the other one is called Lenin, and the last groomsman, Ho Chi Minh. So brilliant. In the lineup, Frederick Engels, the husband, Chris Mither, Marx, Lenin, and Ho Chi Minh. Great bride. I mean, I don't think your wedding is going to be as revolutionary as theirs, to be honest, Jin.
Yeah, no, we can never outdo them, and we just have
we can only dream to have. But thank you very much for your stuff this week, Jen. I think we've had a great conversation. A very big week in the news, and we'll be back next week at the same time for those of you who are watching with the news of the week for next week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.